They laughed at her, right there in the street. But one man saw a fire no one else dared to touch.
Mail-order bride was rejected as too fat, until one man saw the beauty no one else could. Snow whispered across the tracks as the stagecoach creaked to a stop in Three Pines, Montana Territory, 1889. The air was sharp with pine and cold ash, the kind that bit through wool and bone. Evelyn Harrow stepped down in a navy blue traveling dress stretched tight at the seams, the hem wet with slush. Her gloved fingers clutched a folded letter, edges softened from handling, ink faded by hope. Her boots sank slightly in the snow as she looked around. The depot was a squat building of timber and grit, with a crooked sign and a row of townsfolk already gathering like crows. Men leaned on posts. Women glanced out from windows. Somewhere a child laughed and was quickly hushed. Then she saw him, Jebediah Cross, tall, angular, with a tobacco-stained beard and the eyes of a man who'd never said please in his life. He wore a long oilskin coat and a look that already tasted disappointment. "You Jebediah?" she asked, stepping forward. He looked her up and down, lips tightening. "You Evelyn Harrow?" She smiled nervously. "That's me." He didn't answer right away. He turned to the cluster of men watching nearby and raised his voice. "I asked for strong, not swollen." The silence broke like thin glass. Laughter burst out, some guffaws, some snorts, others just cruel grins behind calloused hands. Evelyn felt heat rise up her neck despite the winter. Her cheeks burned. Her heart turned to stone. Jebediah walked up to her, took the letter from her hand like it was diseased, and tore it in two. The halves fell between them and vanished beneath boot and snow. "I'm not desperate enough to marry a cow," he muttered, and walked away. No one stopped him. No one spoke. Evelyn stood still, chest heaving beneath the corset she now regretted wearing. A boy pointed at her. A woman whispered behind a gloved hand. The stagecoach driver looked away. She did not cry. Instead, she picked up the torn halves of the letter, turned her back on the town square, and walked slowly down Main Street. Every window seemed to have eyes. Every eye seemed to say, "You don't belong here." She found lodging above the saddle shop, where an old man named Hishel muttered, "You pay, you stay," and handed her a rusted key. The room was cold and crooked. The floor creaked like it was trying to whisper secrets. But it was hers. In the following days, Evelyn knocked on every door in town that didn't spit when they saw her. Only one opened kindly, Mrs. Levin's seamstress parlor. The old widow behind the counter squinted at her, then nodded. "You got hands?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then prove 'em." Evelyn spent the day mending buttons, darning socks, and reworking a velvet collar. By sunset, Levin gave a grunt of approval. "You'll do. Come back tomorrow." She returned every day after that. Sewing brought peace. Fabric did not judge. Threads didn't laugh. But whispers spread like smoke. "That's the fat bride from back east." Jebediah dodged a bullet. "Did you hear what she eats?" Even the schoolchildren began to rhyme about her behind their mittens. One morning, the sheriff came knocking. Riker Doyle was a lean man with a stiff gait and eyes like black marbles. His tin star glinted as he stood in her doorway, chewing a toothpick like it was the last piece of meat on earth. "This town don't take kindly to out-of-place women," he said flatly. "I'm not causing trouble," Evelyn replied, brushing lint from her skirt. "You showing up here was trouble enough. Don't let folks get any angrier than they already are." She didn't respond, just met his stare with one of her own until he turned and walked off into the snow. That night, she lit a single candle in her window, stared at its flame, and thought about home. About her sisters who had married rich or clever. About her father who said, "You have to marry a man with poor eyesight or a broken spirit." About the letter she answered out of desperation, not love. Sleep didn't come. In the dark, she heard footsteps on the stairs. A low thud. A scrape. Then silence. When she opened her door at dawn, a foul stench at her first. Pig fat, congealed and slathered across the wood. Below it, painted in angry black strokes, the word, "unwanted." She didn't scream. She didn't wake Herschel. She stared at it for a long time, her breath fogging in the cold. Then she went back inside, fetched a rag and hot water, and scrubbed the door clean. "You don't get to decide my worth," she whispered to the wood, her voice steady, her jaw set like mountain stone. The day passed without incident. She returned to the seamstress, sewed silently, and walked home in the dimming light. But she didn't know she was being watched. Down the alley between the apothecary and the old boarding house, a man leaned in shadow. He wore a coat with a torn shoulder, a scar down the side of his jaw, and a silver coin he flipped through his fingers like it was keeping rhythm with his heart. He watched Evelyn walk past with her shoulders square and her chin high. Not broken. Not yet. The coin spun in his hand, caught a glint of moonlight, then vanished into his pocket. And the stranger, silent as snowfall, stepped deeper into the dark. The doorbell above the seamstress shop jingled softly as a tall man stepped inside, bringing with him a gust of mountain air and the scent of pine smoke. Evelyn looked up from her stitching, her fingers paused over a fraying ham, and saw him for the first time in daylight. He was broad-shouldered, though slightly hunched. His coat, once blue union wool, was sun-faded and torn at the elbow. A deep scar ran from the hinge of his jaw to his temple, like a knife had once tried to erase part of him. He walked with a cane of polished pine, and each step thudded faintly against the wooden floorboards. "Ma'am," he said with a nod, his voice a low, warm drawl that didn't quite match his worn exterior. "I heard tell you do mending here. Figured it was time this old coat went quiet." Mrs. Levin bustled out from the back, wiping her hands. "Depends. You looking for replacement or resurrection?" The mun smiled slightly. "Reckon even the dead deserve a decent burial. I'll take a new one." As Levin fetched the samples, the man turned his gaze toward Evelyn. Not a flicker of judgment. Not a flinch. Just quiet regard. "You're Miss Harrow, ain't you?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. I seen what happened at the depot," he said, voice softer now. "Folk around here carry small minds in big hats." She glanced away, her cheeks tightening. "Doesn't much matter what they carry." "It does to me," he said. "'Cause you've got fire in you, Miss Harrow. That ain't fat. That's fuel." She blinked, startled, then laughed. Not much, a small breath of warmth, but it was the first since arriving in Three Pines. He smiled in return and extended a hand. "Luke Thatcher." She took it. His palm was calloused, firm, but his touch was careful, like he didn't want to leave a bruise. By the time he left the shop in a new brown duster, the town had already begun to whisper. Evelyn Harrow and the limping stranger. A pair of misfits, if there ever was one. He came back 2 days later, asking for a scarf. Left with a book. Next time, it was a jar of preserves. Then a tin of coffee. Each visit brought longer conversations and a flicker more ease between them. He'd sit on the bench outside the shop while she worked, reading or whittling. She'd bring out tea, and they'd talk about books, recipes, war, and silence. She learned he lived alone in a cabin up Bitter Pine Ridge, a good mile beyond the last marker, near the mouth of a forgotten mining trail. "Why stay up there?" she asked one evening as the sky burned orange above the peaks. Luke gazed off toward the hills. Joyce said, "Because gold ain't the only thing buried in those hills. Sometimes you bury yourself." The words settled like dust in her chest. She didn't pry further. She didn't need to. By late September, he was coming to town twice a week. She packed him bread, helped him stitch his worn gloves, and once brought him a Bible with pressed lilac petals tucked inside. He didn't speak of love, and she didn't dare hope, but there was something between them, wordless and steady, like the heartbeat of the earth. Then came the church social. Evelyn received an invitation, a thin envelope slipped beneath her door with a note from the pastor's wife, written in flowery script. She almost didn't go, but something inside her whispered that she was tired of hiding. She wore a dark green dress, the only one that still fit well, with a brooch her mother had sent from back east. Her hair was pinned up carefully. Her shoes shined. The room was lit with lanterns of laughter. Tables lined with pies and cider. Children ran in circles, and fiddlers played something fast and forgettable. She stood at the edge, clutching her plate, when the doors opened wide and walked Jivita across, arm in arm with a woman so narrow and pale she looked carved from salt. Her waist could have been cinched by a belt buckle. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She simply stood, perfectly still, like something expensive and breakable. Jebediah saw Evelyn, smirked, loudly said, "This one don't need 2 chairs." Laughter followed. She felt it slice through her like prairie wine through thin cloth. The old humiliation returned in full, a second harvest of shame. She left her plate untouched, slipped out the back, and walked blindly toward the town well where the moonlight fell cold and silver. She sat on the stone edge, tears clinging to her lashes but refusing to fall. Then she heard a cane tapping behind her. Luke sat down beside her, holding a silver coin between his fingers. I heard what happened. She didn't look at him. I should leave. Should have left the day I got here. He flipped the coin in his hand, slow and thoughtful. This here's my war coin. Gettysburg. Kept it ever since. Heads means stay. Tails means run. She scoffed, half a laugh and half a sob. What if it lands on its edge? Then God's still deciding, he said, and flipped it high. It spun in the air, caught the moonlight, then landed on his palm. Heads. He looked at her and smiled. Good. 'Cause I ain't lettin' this town chase away the best soul it's ever mocked. She stared at him then. Really saw him. The man who walked with pain but never pity. The man who looked at her like she was made of something unbreakable. For the first time, she believed she might be. He walked her back to her lodging. Said nothing more. Just tipped his hat and limped off into the dark. She watched him go, her heart burning a slow, fierce fire. The next morning, smoke greeted her. Her door had been set ablaze, blackened at the bottom, scorched across the frame. Her curtains were ash. Her belongings, torn and scattered. The little Bible, gone. The dress, slashed. The brooch, trampled. Pinned to what remained of her bed was a note scrawled in soot-smudged ink. Leave before winter. Or next time, it's you. She stood among the ruin in silence. Then she picked up the coin Luke had left on her windowsill, his silent message that he was near. The coin was warm in her palm, and her fire, at last, had found fuel. Snow came early to Bitter Pine Ridge, soft and silent, dusting the world in white before October had breathed its last. Evelyn stood on the edge of town with a single suitcase and a heart that no longer trembled. Behind her, smoke still rose faintly from the blackened edges of her door. Before her, Luke waited astride a dun-colored mule, the reins loose in his gloved hand, his breath clouding the air between them. I ain't asking you to run, he said quietly. Just to rest a while where the world can't spit on your boots. Evelyn looked once more at the crooked rooftops of Three Pines, the place that had tried to break her spirit with laughter and fire, and nodded. I'm not running. I'm just choosing better company. They rode in silence, following a narrow trail that wound higher and deeper into the forest, the pine trees rising like watchmen around them. The mule plodded steady through the snow-crusted dirt, and the sound of civilization faded with each hoofbeat. By the time they reached the clearing, the sun was low, bleeding gold through the trees. Luke's cabin was squat and square, made of thick timber, with a bent stovepipe coughing smoke from the roof. A woodshed leaned against one side, and a frozen creek trickled nearby beneath a skin of ice. It ain't much, Luke said, dismounting with a quiet grunt. But it's honest. Evelyn stepped down, boots crunching on frost. She looked around, took a deep breath of pine and wood smoke, and smiled. It's more home than I've known in years. Inside, the air was warm and full of quiet. A single room stretched wide, with a hearth at one end, a narrow bed along the wall, a rough-hewn table, and shelves lined with tin cups, old books, and jars of dried herbs. The place smelled of cedar and old paper, of tobacco, and something faintly sweet, maybe apples gone soft in a crate. She unpacked without asking, stacking her belongings neatly near the hearth. Luke brought him more wood, then sat at the table with a slow exhale like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. Life in the ridge was harder than town, but simpler. Evelyn swept and scrubbed, patched curtains, aired blankets, and organized cupboards. Luke taught her how to trap small game and how to track wind through trees. She read aloud to him each night, Dickens, Emerson, Whitman, and he listened with his eyes half closed, his cane resting across his lap like a quiet companion. Some nights, they played cards. Some nights, they just sat and watched the flames move like ghosts across the logs. And sometimes, when she laughed at one of his dry, unexpected jokes, he'd look at her like she'd rebuilt something inside him he thought long buried. They never touched, never crossed the line they both felt humming in the air like a wire drawn tight, but their silence was full of what might come, if only the world allowed it. One gray morning, Evelyn was cleaning the small chest beneath Luke's bed when she found the letter. It was yellowed, the ink faded but legible. A mail-order bride application, half-finished, never sealed, never sent. Her name wasn't on it, but the handwriting was unmistakably his. She read the words once, twice, then walked outside and found him chopping wood by the shed, his coat unbuttoned, breath fogging as he swung the axe. "You wrote for someone," she said, not accusing, just steady. Luke stopped. The axe hovered in the air, then dropped into the stump with a dull thud. "I did," he said, "but I never sent it." "Why not?" He looked up at her, jaw clenched. "'Cause I thought no one could love what the war left behind." Evelyn stepped closer, eyes burning. "Then why me?" He looked at her like he'd never seen her before, or maybe like he'd always seen her, and was just now letting himself admit it. "Because you didn't flinch," he whispered. "Not once. I saw men die trying to be remembered, but I trade all of them for one woman who sees me and don't flinch." The moment stretched between them like a held breath. Then a sound cracked it, a sharp whistle, then the thud of hooves on frozen ground. 2 horses and a mule rode into the clearing, steam rising off their backs. Sheriff Riker Doyle led them, his coat flapping open to reveal his badge like a threat. Behind him, 2 deputies dismounted with rifles slung over their shoulders. Luke stepped in front of Evelyn without thinking. "That's close enough." Riker raised a hand, mock-friendly. "Just to visit Thatcher. Word is your harboring threat." Evelyn stepped forward, her voice like flint striking steel. "You came this far to scare a woman. I'm not so easy to break." Riker tilted his head, grinning without warmth. "Town council thinks different. Says you don't belong." "You got no law past the ridge," Luke said. "You lay one hand on her, and I'll show you what Gettysburg taught me." The deputies shifted, uneasy. Riker stared at Luke a moment too long, then spat into the snow. "Let Winter deal with you both." He turned and rode off without another word. Luke watched them go, his face carved from stone. Then he turned to Evelyn, voice low and hoarse. "You ain't a mail-order bride anymore," he said. "You're the woman I would have walked to hell for." She didn't answer, just looked at him like she wanted to memorize him before the wind carried the words away. The blizzard came that night. It roared over the ridge like something wild and alive, screaming through the trees and hammering the cabin walls with snow and sleet. They huddled near the fire, wrapped in quilts, but supplies were thin and the cold unrelenting. By the second day, Luke was fevered. He tried to stand and collapsed, his skin pale, sweat beating down his brow. He mumbled names Evelyn didn't recognize, places soaked in blood, orders shouted, friends lost. His body shivered beneath the blankets, and the firewood dwindled low. Evelyn knelt beside him, wiping his brow, her heart pounding like hooves on frozen ground. Outside, the snow fell harder. Inside, she whispered, "You're not dying. Not yet. Not like this." And for the first time since she'd arrived in Montana, Evelyn Harrow was truly afraid.